The story of Samuel's calling is a really well-known text from the Bible, at least in the Christian circles. I mean, every kid remembers hearing some story of this little boy who hears the voice of God calling him by name, Samuel, Samuel. And at first he thinks it's the voice of Eli, the priest, that's calling him. And then at the end he realizes that it's God himself who is calling him by name. Very cool story. But there's something about this little boy Samuel being in the temple that has always bothered me a little. Because when you hear the stories or you see the pictures of Samuel lying there in his bed, he's always pictured as a really small kid. I mean, a really small kid. And I can't help thinking how horrible it must have been for such a small kid to be separated from his family and having to spend his time there in the temple with this old, almost blind priest Eli. And how could his parents let him go there that small? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little strained for being bothered by some questions like this, but, well, I haven't been able to answer them. So when I started studying and translating the text about Samuel's birth and how he came to the temple in the first place, well, it didn't really help at all. On the contrary, it made it even worse, because I started translating verses like 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 22, where Hannah, his mother, says that she will bring him to the temple when he is weaned, as in when she's not breastfeeding him anymore. And I thought, breastfeeding? Oh my goodness! I mean, he must have been really, really small. I mean, how could she do that? How could she take him there when he was so tiny? And I found out that generally it is estimated that the time when people stopped breastfeeding at that time was when the kid was about 3 years old. Now, that's not written in the text in the first book of Samuel. It's in some external sources, and it's not talking about this specific event. It's just a hint to what was the general custom in those cultures at that area, around that same time. So it doesn't mean it was necessarily the case with Samuel, but well, it might have been. But I mean, 3 years, that's really small. Really, really small. Now, the only word that we find describing Samuel here in the text itself is the Hebrew word na'ar. And well, that isn't very helpful, because the word na'ar has a massive range of meanings, and this is something super typical in the biblical Hebrew, because you can have like one word in Hebrew that has like easily 10 different meanings when you try to translate it into English, for example. And na'ar, well, it can mean a newborn baby, it can mean a kid that's 3 months old, it can mean a young adult, a lad, and basically everything in between. It's the word that Jeremiah, for example, uses for himself when he says in Jeremiah chapter 1 that he can't speak because he's only a na'ar. Well, we read it and still we don't think that he was there a 3-year-old boy. I mean, na'ar, it's something that you can contrast with old, like the young men and the old men. So for sure, na'ar is not an old dude, but that's it really. How young na'ar is, well, we don't know. It depends on the context. So, in 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 24, it just says about Samuel being taken to the temple, and it says like, and the na'ar, which means Samuel, was a na'ar. So great, that's like saying the boy was a boy, and that's not helpful at all. That gives us absolutely no indication as to how old he was. Well, old he was not, but that's all we know. So we know that Samuel's age was something after being weaned. We don't know exactly how old he was when he was weaned, and we don't know exactly if he was taken immediately after the moment he was weaned, but around that time. And I was thinking, like, how could Hannah do that? I mean, didn't she want to take care of him? Now, I thought it was interesting how the whole process of taking Samuel to the temple actually went. Because in verse 21 we read that it's Elkanah, the father of Samuel, who first says that he thinks they should take the boy to the temple, like straight after he was born. And he doesn't say it directly, but it says there that he went again to offer the yearly sacrifice and to offer his vow. Now the sacrifice makes sense because that's what he has been doing many times in this story, but a vow? This is the first time that we hear of him offering a vow. Now, what kind of a vow could that be? We're not told. But if you read the verse within the context, within the story, then there's just one vow that has been made. And that's the vow of Hannah, saying that she will give Samuel to the Lord. And of course, Samuel is just as much a son of his father as of his mother, so it is also Elkanah in that sense who is giving Samuel to the Lord. So I'm assuming that Elkanah here would like to offer his vow, meaning bring the baby to the Lord, since that's what was earlier promised. And Hannah's answer to that makes total sense. She says that she doesn't want to take the kid to the temple before he is weaned. Not when he is a baby, only after he is not dependent on his mother anymore. That's the idea that Hannah expresses in verse 22. Not yet, not yet. Not before he is ready. Now this changed my perspective. Instead of thinking of Hannah as a mom abandoning her tiny little baby, she says, no, I want to take care of him until he is old enough. Then right at the end of the chapter we have the event that she then decided that Samuel is old enough and takes him to the temple. And there the last verse of the chapter, well, that's a little bit problematic. Because it has Hannah saying that now she is giving the boy to the Lord because he was asked from the Lord and obviously also received from the Lord. And then it ends with the words, now literally from Hebrew, and he worshipped the Lord there. And he worshipped the Lord there. Now people have been trying to find out who is this he that is worshipping, and some say that it's maybe priest Eli, and some say maybe it's Elkanah, the husband of Hannah. Because it's a little bit weird that it is Hannah who is talking, but then the one who is worshipping is not a woman. But the verb is in a masculine form, meaning it was a male person who was doing the worshipping. Now, I'm not saying that I know the answer, but as I was translating that verse, the most logical solution for me was to understand it so that it was Samuel who worshipped the Lord there. I mean, all the time Hannah is talking about Samuel. He is the topic of discussion. Elkanah or Eli are not at all part of the speech. Hannah is talking about Samuel. And then it states that he worshipped the Lord there. So logically, I would read it as Samuel worshipping the Lord there. And that, of course, would mean that Samuel had to be big enough to be able to worship the Lord. He couldn't have been a very tiny kid if it said of him that he was doing some worshipping in the temple. And the text continues in chapter 2 to talk about Samuel in the same kind of a way, that his parents went home and he stayed there ministering to the Lord. I mean, would you say that a 3-year-old would be ministering to the Lord? I don't know. But the most important point for me to realize in this story was that Samuel was left to be in the temple. That Samuel was in the temple. He was in the closest presence of the Lord that was in any way possible on earth. In chapter 3, verse 3, it says that he was even sleeping in the temple, in the place where the ark of the Lord was. I mean, the ark. I mean, how much closer to the presence of God can a human being get? And that's where Samuel was sleeping. So I'm thinking that if he spent his early years there right in the presence of the Lord, then how can I worry for him? I mean, isn't that actually a pretty ideal place for a person to be in? I mean, can any mortal offer you something better? Could have any mortal offered Samuel something better? Could have he been in a place that was any safer than that? In the presence of the Lord, sleeping next to the Ark of the Covenant. So I don't say that I got all my questions answered, no. But I have to say that finding out this stuff, it did calm my mind. I mean, I'm not worrying for the little Samuel boy anymore. You know, how come he was there and who was taking care of him and how small he must have been. No, he was in the presence of the Lord. What better place could there be? Maybe that's what his mom was thinking as well. Maybe.